Welcome back. We're on week 3 now. From here on out, as we work with our biped character, we're going to be adding key rigging elements each week to allow us or our animators to manipulate our geometry in easy ways. Since this is a kind of introduction to KineFX course, we're going to be creating a character rig that is not dissimilar from a rig that we might be able to create in Maya, or rigs that, if you have rigged before, maybe you kind of started with learning. So we're kind of trying to replicate a similar pipeline that we're used to in other DCCs like Maya. KineFX can of course do lots of crazy things because you can manipulate points in any ways that you can manipulate points in Houdini to begin with. So you can put points into a DOPS system, or any kind of simulation if you want to, and see how you can play around with that aspect of KineFX. But like I said, for us, for our kind of introduction to rigging course, for getting characters moving and animating by hand and by retargeting, we're setting up a basic rig that's not dissimilar from a Maya rig. So let's get started. This week we will be covering lots of legs. Now legs might be kind of boring, but they're actually quite complicated when you think about them. If this is your first time rigging, they are the primary contact point between the ground and our person. And they also have multiple contact points. You can think of their contact points as the heel as we come down onto the ground when we're taking a step, and our whole flat of our foot, the ball of our foot as we start to lift up off the ground, and then the toes of our foot as well. As you might have noticed, I've kind of switched my model over here to the rig that I built for the demo scene that was seen as this trailer and that we're building up to in this course. So we can see if I click my rig pose here, we have a lot more joints because when I built this rig initially, I built twist joints for all of my limbs, for the legs and for the arms. I also had some toes that I'm actually going to reinitiate here. Some toe points here that went beyond the foot. I use them as orientation points, but they also might have a use later. And I'm going to immediately take back what I did and put down that delete node. And I'll explain why in a minute. It has to do with our reverse foot system. So as I was just explaining, our foot has multiple contact points: our heel, the ball of our foot, and our toes. As we roll through our foot, we have those contact points and different rotation points with the ground. If you only have your heel on the ground and you rotate your ankle or push down on your heel, your knee responds accordingly. But if you have your ankle and the heel of your foot lifted up and the only contact point is the ball of your foot, then you now have an extra pivot point that's different from our heel. The way that we solve for that system of complicated pivots is called a reverse foot system. It's where instead of driving down the chain like how we have our rig set up, we actually drive from our heel. I also, apparently when I set up this rig, did not put in a root, so I'm going to do that real quick. Even if we've exported our skeleton like I have here, you can still manipulate things and have a lot less node data than what we had. I'm just going to put down an add SOP real quick. Keep it at 0, 0. We'll put this as a root. We'll put our rig doctor in here for initiating transforms. We won't initialize missing names because we'll just put down a name node instead, and we'll just call it root. And now when we put down a merge, we can merge this chain with this chain. We have all of our joints in one spot now. And I'll put down a parent joint node real quick. We seem to have not quite gotten our point to appear there. Because I forgot to actually enable a point. Perfect. Now we actually see our root, and we can just parent our cog to our root as such. Perfect. And then we'll put that into our rest and our anim skeleton, or our deform skeleton. And now we have that root that when we move things around, we're good to go. There we go. Awesome. So let's get started with our legs. Our root is kind of important to have because we will use it to allow our IKs to follow with the root, or if you prefer your rigging structure to not have a root, then you probably have a different kind of structure in mind already, and this isn't your first rodeo, so to speak. So if you do have a different rigging structure in mind, try and extrapolate the kind of concepts and structure we're building here to apply to your own structure that you have a preference for. As we just saw there, if we have elements of our rig that we want to add that aren't part of our bind rig, that aren't part of our captured rig, we can add them in. There's nothing stopping us, even after our export, to do so. And in fact, that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to put down a few more add SOPs, or rather just a single add SOP. And I'm going to begin editing our skeleton a little bit to accommodate for our reverse footnode. All I'm going to do is reposition this point so it's at our heel. So we can have that heel pivot point in mind. So we'll get it as in line as we can, and I can reference the skeleton as well if I want to. There's where our toe and ball are, and our heel was pretty in line with where that was, I think. Could be a little bit more over. Yeah, that should be fine, just right there. Somewhere where our heel will connect naturally for our character. We want 1 point for each of our heels, but we'll actually use a mirror mode, a mirror joints to get that positioned in place. So we have our add L heel. That's what we'll call that. Now we just need to give it a name, just like we did with our root. Call it L heel. And we need to initiate our transforms, so we can get a rig doctor in here. Initiate transforms. We don't need names. And we can merge it with our main chain here. Or actually, we're going to mirror it real quick first. And before we mirror it, I'm actually going to make sure orientation is the way I want it to be. So let's see, our orientation is way whack on that. I'm going to try and position it just so it's in alignment with world space. And we'll see how well that goes. So I'm actually going to put down a second point here, and I'm going to copy these values over to this point real quick. So we just start with the same position. There we go. And we're just going to increase our z just a little bit to drag that point forward. And we'll put down a parent node real quick here, where we parent our nodes together. And I'm actually going to just select our group of 0 there, so that only our heel point is named the way that we want it to be named. And here we can see that with our parent node, you can also parent not by name if you want to, but by value of our point value. So now we have a kind of hierarchy here, so that we can initialize names on this real quick, because I think we're getting some errors for 0.01 here. There we go. Perfect. Now we have a simple hierarchy that allows us to reference one point to another, that'll let us orient these joints easier. And now that we have that done, we can delete the joint we don't need. Just get rid of that 0.1. And now we can mirror our skeleton, which is just this one point, but still we want to make sure we mirror it so that our orientation is proper. Perfect. And now we can add this chain of things into our hierarchy, just like we did with that root that I missed a second ago, using a merge node. As such. And instead of using the chain coming from our capture pose here, I'm actually going to, since we don't need these heel points for our bone to form, we only are going to use them as a way of manipulating our main chain of things. We actually don't need to worry about changing our rest geometry here, our rest skeleton. We can simply use it to manipulate our deform chain, our deform skeleton. I'm going to group these together just for readability. And so we can minimize things. I'm going to put down apparent joints as well. Actually, we don't need to do that quite yet. Okay, now the fun part begins. We're going to start taking away joints and building controls, kind of like we did in the first week, but in a much more complicated way, a sophisticated way. So let's start to think about what we need to do for our legs. Our legs and this kind of asset that we're going to make a new digital asset that will allow us to promote parameters up to control the legs, so we can separate out our control systems. So we can have an HDA for our legs and feet, and an HDA for our arms. And then from there, you can decide if you want to build a one big HDA where you can control everything from one point, or if you're happy with having these building blocks that you can grab at any point that you may need them in the future. Like when we're retargeting, you can grab the arm HDA that we'll make, and we can reposition some arms. We'll get into that in a few weeks when we get into retargeting. But that's kind of the general structure we're going to be doing here. We're going to build a system, we're going to package it into an HDA so that we can use it later. So our legs, we're going to be controlling some IK controls. FK controls are really easy because all we have to do is extract the points, turn them into FK controls just with a rig pose, and then we can either use a blend node or whatever to control our main chain. But our IK controls are what's going to be complicated, especially with that reverse foot system. We will want to control the position of our foot from our heel, so we can position the foot flat with the ground with our heel. We'll want to be able to rotate around our heel, and we'll want to be able to then position and rotate around the ball of our foot and the toe of our foot. So there's two ways we can approach that. We can do a manual way, which is what we'll start with, and we'll dive into a more both fun, complicated, and new method using a special node for KinEffects. But let's start with a manual way. So we have our chain of things. I'm going to delete this rig pose. We have our main chain here. That's what I'm going to refer to as, I like to think the main chain, and I will refer to the main chain being the actual chain of skeleton joints that are going to be our deform input over here. So we can break away points as such, delete joints, and this is kind of like our selection node. So we're going to delete joints, and we're going to just grab our control points. So we're going to have a few main control points here. We're going to have our cog, so we can control where our character, how low to the ground they are. We are going to have our feet controls. We're going to have our main root control. Everything is going to be parented under the root here, so that when we move the root, we move the whole character. So I'm going to put down a parent node, and I'm going to parent our heels to that. Perfect. Now we have this kind of main chain. We have our main chain and we have a control chain here. And this control chain is going to be controlling some IK positions. Our FK positions just follow along with our main chain, and it's very easy to set up. We'll see that in a few seconds here when we get into FK chains. So now that we have this control chain, we need to be able to edit the main chain. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to hook both of our chains up into a blend skeleton node here. And we're going to blend main and core controls is what I'll call these. So we're going to get our core controls. We're going to make sure we check world space and that our bias is fully to the right towards our control chain of things. Oops. Now when we put down a rig pose on our control side of things, and we look at our skeleton blend here. When we control our points on our control chain, we're controlling the parent system of our main chain. Moving the heels also does so, but the heels are separate points, so there's no primitives connecting them from one another to see it as easily as the root or the cog. So now we have a control chain. We have this rig pose core controls. And we can also hook up some geometry to these core controls. So let's do so real quick. We're going to be using that attach joint geo node as we did in the first week. And let's make a few circles, some primitive circles, polygon circles. I'm going to make it on the XZ plane. And this can be our root. So I'm going to make it like a square there, a diamond. This is going to be our root. I'm going to make it smaller just so it fits around our character's feet. Perfect. So this will be the root. We need to give it a color. We don't need to give it a color, but I like to give it a color for readability. I'm just going to give it a green, or a yellow might be good too, and a name, and we will name it root control. We'll also want, we can just copy this over. We can get one for our cog. And since each control needs to have its own name, this is how we can separate things out. If you want it to have its own shape, you need a new shape for each one, a new size. And then each new control you make needs a new name. If we put two root controls in, we will get Houdini's pick of the two. So we want an individual name, and just copying over our nodes here allows us to pick a new color for our controls and a new kind of shape if we're using this circle node. For the cog, I'm going to use a hexagon. That seems cool. And we'll need one more type of control for our IKs. I'm going to make the IK control something obvious, so maybe like a yellow. And I want it to be a good shape too that's distinct to an IK control, maybe a triangle like so. And if we point it, if we can rotate it just 90 degrees, negative 90 degrees, and we have a pointing forward as well. So that's not half bad, I don't think. And we'll want to change the size to match what we're going for here. Since it's the foot, something a little bit smaller is probably wanted. Something like that. And even if we want it to be, you know, you can make any kind of shape. Changing the radius, since this is technically a circle. That's a pretty good shape, I think. Now we'll want to merge all of these control geometries together to create a kind of library, node here. I'm going to change the cogs size just really quick. Perfect. Now we can put this library into any of our attached geonodes in the future to create, or to be able to grab them at any point. So we can add a new type here, select whatever joints we want to for this kind of control, take our IK controls there. I'm going to actually turn off the arc type to just be closed arc. And now if we take a look, to be a open arc, actually. There we go. Sorry. It's just so we have the lines. If you like having a full plane, that's absolutely up to you. I like just having the edges. It makes it a very familiar environment to kind of the NURBS curves of Maya, which are, in my experience, the typical kind of control shape that is used. So we can add another one for our cog. We can take our cog control. Perfect. And we can add another one for our root. Awesome. So now when we are editing our rig pose here, we can grab those primitives, those geometries, and edit our controls, our control points from there instead. So it's just easy for selectability. We can of course still select the point itself, but if you have a complicated mesh or a lot of geometry or a lot of a dense skeleton, these control geos might help you a lot. And like we discussed in the first week, it can be any shape, any form. You can use a rubber toy if you want to, or a very complicated mesh, or even if you wanted to separate a section of mesh from your rest character and just expand it and make it a solid color, you can do so as well. Or even make it not a solid color, just use a section of your character's mesh. So like if I wanted to grab the wrist when I select the palm of the hand, you could do so by copying a section of this geometry, taking the palm of the hand, inputting it as the control geometry with a name. And anytime you select that palm of the hand, you would select the wrist joint. We have some metacarpals in our hand, so it might not be advantageous to us. But if your animators are, or even yourself are requesting an easier way of selecting aspects of your rig, then you can do so through clever means as discussed. Perfect. Now we have a control chain and some control handles for that chain.